My dad bought a house at 28, no college degree, one income, a factory job in a mid-sized city. The mortgage was around $600 a month. He built a pension, had 2 kids, took a vacation every summer, and retired at 62 with zero debt. I'm 26. I make more than he did at that age, significantly more. And I genuinely cannot tell you with confidence that I will ever own a house at the same ratio of income to cost that he did. Think about that for a second before we go any further. A 30-year-old doctor graduating residency in 2025 earns around $300,000 a year and still has a negative net worth because of $400,000 in student loans that started, compounding the moment they were dispersed. A software engineer in Austin making $140,000 a year takes home maybe $85,000 after taxes, pays $2,400 a month in rent, parks $2,000 into a 401k, and ends the year with maybe $12,000 in liquid savings. A guy in my comments a few months ago told me he earns $82,000 a year, top 20% of earners in his age bracket in this country, and he had $900 in his checking account. More income, more stress, more confusion, less stability. So the actual question isn't how do I earn more? The question is, why does earning more not feel like enough anymore? And is this a feelings problem or a math problem? It's a math problem, and we're going to look at the math. We're going to explain how the wealth accumulation system has been quietly restructured over the last 40 years, why higher nominal income no longer translates to what it used to translate to, and why most people are optimizing for the wrong number entirely. This isn't a complaint video. I'm not here to tell you life is hard. You already know that I'm here to explain the mechanics because the system genuinely changed. And most people are still playing by the old rules because nobody handed them updated patch notes. Here's the metaphor I keep coming back to throughout all of this. If you've ever played an RPG, any open world game where you grind stats and push your character level higher, you know some of them have a mechanic called dynamic difficulty scaling. The game watches you get stronger and then quietly adjusts the enemies to match. Your character improves, the world recalibrates, the gap never closes. You think you're progressing because your numbers are going up, you're doing more damage per hit, your health pool is bigger, but the enemies hit harder too. The bosses have more health, the loot you need to keep improving becomes rarer and more expensive. You never feel the power spike because you were never supposed to. That is the modern economy in one mechanic. Your salary is your character stats. Asset prices, cost of living, debt structures, and tax policy are the enemy scaling system. And nobody ever shows you the difficulty settings menu. You're just grinding and wondering why it doesn't feel like progress. We'll come back to this metaphor. Let's get into the actual numbers first, because the gap between perception and reality here is genuinely shocking. In 1973, the median male worker in the United States earned the equivalent of about $56,000 in today's purchasing power. He could afford a median-priced home with roughly 4 years of gross income. The home cost about 4 times what he made in a year. Today, the median home price in the United States sits somewhere around $420,000. The median household income, not individual, household is around $78,000. That's a ratio of roughly 5.4 to 1, and that's the national median, meaning it includes every low cost of living market in the country. In any major metro area where the jobs actually are, you're looking at ratios of 8 to 1, 10 to 1, 12 to 1. In cities like San Francisco or New York, a median priced home is 12 to 15 times the median individual income. So the first thing to understand is this: we are not dealing with a motivation problem or a work ethic problem. We are dealing with a structural ratio problem. The game scaled up around us, and the scaling happened gradually enough that most people blame themselves for not keeping up. Now, the standard response to this, and I want to address it directly because you're probably already thinking it, is that wages have also gone up. And yes, technically, nominal wages are higher. A factory worker in 1973 made maybe $12,000 a year in actual dollars. Today, they might make $45,000. So wages went up, right? 3.5 times, sure. And home prices went up 9 times in the same period. And college tuition went up 15 times adjusted for inflation. And health insurance premiums went up roughly 10 times in real terms since the early 90s. So yes, wages went up, they just went up the slowest. This is what I mean when I talk about the difficulty scaling mechanic. The stats that hurt you scaled faster than the stats that help you. Your attack power went from 12 to 45. The enemy health went from 50 to 500. You're landing harder hits on something that doesn't die anymore. And look, I want to be precise here because this is where a lot of commentary on this topic gets sloppy. The problem isn't inflation in the general sense. Inflation is just purchasing power erosion across a basket of goods. The actual problem is selective inflation. The fact that the things that build long-term wealth and stability, specifically housing, education, healthcare, and asset markets, have inflated dramatically faster than everything else. Meanwhile, consumer goods, phones, televisions, clothes, food have gotten relatively cheaper or stayed flat, which means you can feel like your lifestyle is fine because your TV is nice and your streaming subscriptions are cheap, but you're getting priced out of the structural assets that actually compound over time. That's not an accident. That's how the system recalibrated. The everyday stuff got cheaper to keep you calm. The wealth building stuff got more expensive to keep you renting. Okay, so let's say you accept that framing. The natural next question is, why? Why did this happen? And this is where we get into the second layer of the mechanic. Between 1980 and 2020, the United States and most Western economies ran an extended experiment in low interest rate monetary policy combined with financialization of the economy. What that means in plain terms, money became cheap to borrow, so people who already had assets could leverage those assets to buy more assets, which made asset prices go up, which made them wealthier, which let them borrow more. The asset-owning class got access to what is basically an infinite reload glitch. You own something, you borrow against it at low rates. You buy something else with that money, that thing goes up, you repeat. People who had no assets when this era started had no entry point to the glitch. They weren't locked out by laziness. They were locked out by timing and structure. And this matters because a lot of people in our age group are walking around feeling like they failed at something when actually they showed up to a game that was already deep into the third act for other players. Here's a real number to sit with. In 1989, the bottom 50% of American households held roughly 3% of total national wealth. By 2023, after the longest bull market in American history and one of the largest monetary expansions ever, the bottom 50% held roughly 2.5%. Despite 3 decades of economic growth, massive nominal income gains, and the creation of entirely new industries, the bottom half share of wealth didn't just fail to grow, it shrank slightly. Now, I want to be really clear about what I'm saying here, because I'm not making a political argument. I'm making a systems argument. If you put me in charge and told me to design a system that would look like it was growing and improving while concentrating wealth more tightly at the top, I would design exactly what was built between 1980 and now. Asset appreciation plus low-cost borrowing for asset holders plus wage stagnation for non-asset holders equals exactly the outcome we observed. The system worked perfectly. It just didn't work for the people who thought they were participating in it by getting a job and saving into a 401k. The 401k, by the way, is its own thing. That was introduced in 1978 as an obscure tax code provision, and by the 90s had effectively replaced the pension as the default retirement vehicle for most Americans. The difference matters. A pension is a defined benefit. You're promised a specific monthly payment in retirement regardless of market conditions. A 401k is a defined contribution. You put in money, the market does whatever it does, and you get whatever the market gives you. Corporations loved the switch because it transferred the risk entirely onto the employee. Your employer doesn't have to promise you anything anymore. They match a few percent, pat you on the back, and if the market drops 40% the year you're supposed to retire, that's your problem, not theirs. And here's the darkest part. For people who were already rich and investing heavily in equities, the shift to a market-based retirement system was great. For median workers who contribute 2 or 3% of a moderate salary into a target date fund, the math is brutal. A person earning $60,000 a year who saves 5% into a 401k from age 25 to 65 with a 7% average annual return ends up with around $350,000. That sounds fine until you realize $350,000 at a 4% annual withdrawal rate gives you $14,000 a year in retirement income. That's not retirement. That's a slow financial suffocation. So that's the first escalation. The game scaled around you. The tools you were given are not built for the outcome you were promised. And if you spend your 20s doing everything right by the standard playbook, You might reach 50 and discover you played the correct moves in the wrong game. Let me tell you about a pattern I've observed repeatedly across different people in different income brackets. And I'm going to simplify this into a scenario because I think it illustrates the trap better than abstract data does. Imagine two people. I'll call them Marcus and Daniel. Marcus earns $52,000 a year in a mid-sized city. He rents a modest apartment, drives an older car, puts away about $800 a month between his savings account and his 401k. He doesn't spend extravagantly, he follows every piece of conventional financial advice. At 30, he has about $40,000 in total savings and retirement accounts. Daniel earns $115,000 a year, lives in a higher cost city, rents a nicer apartment, leases a car, eats out more, travels more. He puts away $1,200 a month into his 401k and a taxable brokerage. At 30, he has about $60,000 across accounts. Now here's the thing most people miss. Marcus's savings rate as a percentage of income is actually higher. He's more disciplined by almost any behavioral measure, but Daniel's absolute accumulation is greater because of income. And more importantly, Daniel has more optionality. He can redirect spending, pick up a side income more easily in a higher paying field, access better credit, potentially shift into roles that pay even more. The system doesn't reward discipline equally at different income levels. It rewards absolute numbers. You can be the most frugal, disciplined, patient person in your income bracket and still accumulate less than someone with worse habits and higher income. Which means if your income level is capped by your current structure, optimizing your behavior within that structure eventually hits diminishing returns. At some point, the only lever that actually moves the outcome is income growth or asset acquisition, not savings rate. This is the mental shift that most financial content refuses to say directly. Probably because it's uncomfortable. Discipline matters, but discipline applied to the wrong input produces very small outputs. You can squeeze a lemon as hard as you want. It's not going to give you orange juice. Right, so if you've been watching since the beginning and you're tracking the thread here, this channel is exactly about this kind of structural thinking. The framing most financial content gives you is behavioral: spend less, save more, be patient. I'm not saying those are wrong, I'm saying they're incomplete, and incomplete advice at scale causes real damage to people who follow it faithfully. If you want to stay in the loop as we go deeper into these systems, hit subscribe. One click, no algorithm drama on my end. I just keep building the map, you keep using it. Alright, third layer. This is where it gets genuinely weird, because we've established that the purchasing power of your income has eroded relative to assets. And we've established that the retirement tools most people use are structurally insufficient for building real wealth. But there's a third mechanic operating simultaneously that almost nobody discusses honestly. It's the cost of middle-class signaling. Here's what I mean. The middle class in America, and in most developed Western economies, is partially defined not by income, but by consumption patterns. There are things you buy and maintain not because you want them, but because your income level signals that you should have them. This isn't purely vanity. A lot of it is functional. You need a reliable car to keep a professional job in most cities. You need a smartphone and a fast internet connection to participate in basically any modern economy. You need certain clothes for certain professional environments. You need to live in a neighborhood with decent schools if you have kids. You need health insurance. These aren't luxuries, they're infrastructure costs of being a functional adult in a credentialed economy. But those infrastructure costs have scaled faster than income for the middle class. And this is where I think the stress actually lives for most people in our age group. It's not that we make less than our parents, we technically make more. It's that the mandatory overhead of being a functioning adult in our economic tier has grown faster than our income. The cost of the life you're supposed to have at your income level now consumes more of that income than it used to. Think about it like this. In the game metaphor, your character leveled up, so the game equipped you with better default gear. But that better gear has a higher durability cost. It breaks faster, it needs more maintenance. The upkeep on the upgraded character eats more of your resources than the upkeep on the lower level character did. You look at your stats and they're higher. You look at your wallet and you're somehow more broke. And the insidious part is that some of this overhead is genuinely optional in theory, but socially compulsory in practice. A certain level of apartment to live in when you earn a certain income. A certain brand of phone. A certain level of vacation frequency to maintain social participation in your income peer group. None of it is individually catastrophic. Together, it constitutes what I think of as the lifestyle floor, the minimum monthly spend required to pass as a normal functioning person at your income level, and that floor has been quietly rising for 20 years in a way that savings rate calculations never account for. One short detour. A guy I read about in a personal finance forum, this was maybe 2 years ago, posted that he earned $160,000 a year, couldn't explain where the money went, had no savings, and genuinely believed he was bad at math. He was not bad at math. He had a lifestyle floor of about $12,000 a month, which meant on his $160,000 gross, roughly $9,500 per month after taxes and retirement contributions, he was structurally unable to save without a major behavioral disruption. Not because he was irresponsible, because the spending was normal for someone at his income level and in his city. He'd upgraded his character to the income level where the gear costs more than the paycheck covers. That pattern, I've seen some version of it dozens of times. High income, near zero savings, genuine confusion about where the money goes, no visible vice. It's one of the most predictable traps in the whole system. Now let me give you the actual case study. This is a real scenario I've thought through carefully, using realistic numbers because I think the concrete math makes the point better than anything abstract can. Sarah is 27 years old. She's a mid-level marketing manager at a tech company in a major metropolitan area. She earns $94,000 a year before taxes. She is, by any objective measure, doing well. She contributes 6% to her 401k to get the employer match. After federal and state taxes, her 401k contributions, and health insurance premiums, her actual take-home pay is approximately $59,000 a year, about $4,900 a month. Her monthly expenses break down roughly like this: rent on a one-bedroom apartment, $2,100, car payment plus insurance, $490, groceries and household supplies, $400, student loan payment on $58,000 of debt, $540 a month on an income-based plan, phone, internet subscriptions, $210, gym, personal care, clothing, $250, going out, restaurants, social activities, $350. That's a total monthly spend of about $4,440. She has $460 left over every month, not $4,400. $460. She is not frivolous. She is not impulsive. She is living modestly at her income tier in her city, and she saves approximately $5,500 a year, which takes her about 18 years to hit $100,000 in savings. Not accounting for investment growth, but also not accounting for any emergency that draws down her reserves, any job gap, any major unexpected cost. Meanwhile, her 401k at 6% of $94,000 is about $5,600 a year. At 30 years of compounding at an optimistic 7% annual return, she ends up with around $560,000 in that account, which at a sustainable withdrawal rate provides her about $22,400 a year. She earns nearly six figures. She does everything right by conventional standards, and the system produces an outcome at retirement that is below the federal poverty threshold if that's her only income source. Now, and this is the point I want to land really clearly, this is not a Sarah problem. Sarah did everything the system told her to do. The problem is that the system as commonly presented was calibrated for a world where wages kept up with asset prices, where employer-sponsored pensions covered retirement shortfalls, where healthcare costs didn't devour 15% of household spending, and where the first rung of the property ownership ladder was accessible to someone with a moderate savings rate and a few years of diligent effort. That world no longer exists. The system didn't update the instructions. So what do you actually do? And this is where I want to separate myself from two failure modes I see constantly. Failure mode 1 is the doomer response. The system is broken, the game is rigged, there's no point. That's intellectually lazy and practically useless. Systems being structurally tilted against you does not mean individual outcomes are fixed. It means the median outcome is worse than advertised. That's a different claim. You can still deviate significantly from the median. Failure mode 2 is the grind harder response. Just make more money, just hustle more, just optimize your spending harder. This is the most common advice, and it's partially correct but dangerously incomplete because it doesn't address the structural issue at all. If you just earn more and park it in the same vehicle, You're just feeding more money into a machine that is delivering below optimal outputs at the structural level. The actual move, and this is where I want to give you a framework for thinking about it, exists in 3 levels. Level 1 is what I call closing the floor. This means auditing your lifestyle floor. Not eliminating spending, but distinguishing between spending that is genuinely necessary for your career and well-being versus spending that is socially compelled at your income tier. These are not the same thing. The floor has to be covered. The socially compelled spending is negotiable. Most people cannot tell the difference because they've never explicitly mapped the floor. Map the floor. The goal isn't to be miserable. The goal is to not spend money defending a lifestyle signal that doesn't build anything. Level 2 is redirecting into compounding assets. Not into a savings account, not into a target date retirement fund that you'll touch in 40 years. Into assets that compound with optionality. Index funds you can access, real estate that generates cash flow, equity in a business, skills that open income doors. The 401k matters, but it cannot be the whole thesis because it is illiquid, it is market dependent, and the withdrawal math for most median incomes is genuinely insufficient as a standalone plan. You need parallel stacks, level 3, and this is the one most people skip because it feels abstract until it suddenly becomes very concrete. Is engineering income growth deliberately, not passively. The system will not automatically pay you more because you work harder or stay longer. Wages for most people follow the track that their job title is on, not the track that their individual performance deserves. Which means if you want to break the curve, you have to either change the track, different role, different company, different field, freelance business, or create income streams that are not attached to a track at all. Your employment income has a scaling ceiling. The question is what you're building outside it. I want to be honest about something before we get to the end. I'm not telling you this because I've solved it. I'm telling you this because I've been living inside this problem for 2 years. I've built some things that work. I built some things that didn't. And the biggest thing I learned is that the stress doesn't come from making less than your parents. It comes from finally understanding the gap between the system's promise and the system's delivery, and realizing that nobody is going to close that gap for you. A brief comedic interlude because we need it at this point. The standard response when you bring any of this up at a family dinner is something like, well, maybe you should stop buying coffee every day. Brilliant. $400 a year in saved coffee money. That's my retirement sorted. Thanks, uncle. The other one is your generation just expects too much. Sure, $320,000 starter homes in mid-tier cities. The audacity to expect, truly. Back to it, here's the part of this conversation that I find most psychologically interesting. And I want to sit here for a second because I think it explains the stress more than the numbers do. Our parents' generation, broadly speaking, had a clear success script. Follow the steps, education, stable job, house, family, pension, and the system delivers. The script was legible. You knew what winning looked like, and the track was visible. You could see people ahead of you on it, living proof that it worked. Our generation has inherited the language of that script, but not the mechanics. We're still told the steps, but when you follow them, the outcome doesn't materialize the same way. And the script doesn't come with the disclaimer. So when you do everything right and still can't buy a house or still feel financially precarious, the natural human response is to assume you did something wrong. You internalize the gap as personal failure rather than structural change. That internalized failure is expensive. It produces a specific kind of stress that is hard to name because it doesn't have a clear cause you can point to. It's not I lost my job stress or I can't pay this bill stress. It's something quieter and more corrosive. It's the stress of following the map and not arriving at the destination, of running the correct route in a race where someone moved the finish line. I think this matters because it affects decision-making. People who are confused about why their outcomes don't match their inputs tend to make one of two errors. They either redouble the same inputs, work harder, save more, be more patient, or they abandon the inputs entirely. Stop saving, increase lifestyle spending, rationalize the short term. Both are wrong, but both are predictable responses to an unexplained gap between effort and result. The solution, the only one that actually holds, is to update the map. Not the territory. The map you were given is outdated. The territory is what it is. You cannot negotiate with asset prices or interest rate policy, but you can build a different map that accounts for what the territory actually looks like now, and navigate accordingly. Here's the thing about the game metaphor that I want to close on. In a game with dynamic difficulty scaling, there are players who figure out the mechanics and players who don't. The players who don't keep grinding the same content and wondering why they're not progressing. The players who do, they don't complain about the difficulty scaling, they study it. They find the parts of the game where the scaling hasn't caught up yet. They find the income streams that aren't fully commoditized yet. They find the markets where the arbitrage window is still open. They build outside the leveling system, not inside it. The difficulty scaling mechanic in the real economy is not uniformly applied. There are areas where the old rules still produce the old outcomes. Mid-tier cities where housing ratios are still sane, business structures that allow income to compound without a corporate salary cap, asset classes that are not yet fully bid up by institutional money, skills that are structurally scarce in ways wages haven't caught up to yet. The game has soft spots. They require more work to find than following the default track, but they exist. So let me give you the 3 actual takeaways from everything we just covered, not the generic stuff, the things I think actually move outcomes. The first is to stop optimizing the wrong number. Most people focus on savings rate as a percentage of income. That is a useful number, but it is a downstream number. The upstream number is income growth rate. Savings rate on a stagnant income produces linear results over decades. Income growth at even a modest rate produces exponential results because the base is growing. If you have a choice between squeezing your savings rate harder or investing equivalent energy into growing your income by 15%, grow the income every time. The second is to separate your retirement plan from your wealth plan. The 401k is not a wealth vehicle. It is a tax-advantaged income deferral vehicle with significant withdrawal restrictions and market dependency. It is necessary. It is not sufficient. If your entire wealth building strategy is maxing your 401k and hoping the market cooperates for 30 years, you have a single point of failure plan. Build parallel stacks, even small ones. A taxable brokerage account with 20 years of modest contributions to broad index funds adds genuine optionality the 401k cannot provide. Real estate cash flow, equity in a side business, something that compounds in a different lane. The third is to map your lifestyle floor explicitly and ruthlessly, not to eliminate it. To understand it, there's a number that represents your absolute non-negotiable monthly spend, the floor. There's a number that represents what you actually spend, the ceiling. The gap between those two numbers is your flexibility range. Most people have more flexibility range than they think, but they've never explicitly mapped it so they treat every dollar between the floor and the ceiling as equally fixed. It isn't. That gap is where financial decisions actually live. Map it once, clearly, and the decisions get easier. We started with a simple observation. We earn more than our parents did at the same age. We feel more stressed than they seem to. And the reflex is to explain that as a cultural softness, a generation that expects too much, a motivation problem. It's not. It's a map problem. The map they handed us was drawn for a different terrain. The asset to income ratios changed. The retirement structure changed. The cost of the mandatory overhead of middle-class life changed. The game scaled up and didn't tell you. And most of the advice floating around, spend less, save more, be patient, believe in the process, was written for the old map. The stress isn't weakness. It's what correct pattern recognition feels like before you've updated your strategy. That uncomfortable feeling of, I'm doing this right and it's not working, is valuable information. It's the game telling you the difficulty scaled. Now you know. Now you can actually play. If this kind of systems level thinking on money is something you want more of, subscribe. I'm not going anywhere, but neither is this problem.